My name's Ursula, and this is the channel where I interview people who have achieved financial independence. If you enjoy listening, then please do subscribe. So today I'm speaking to Luke, who achieved financial independence in his early 40s. Hello, Luke, and welcome to the show.
Hello.
So first of all, tell us a bit about yourself. What did you do before you achieved financial independence?
So I spent about a decade in the city, working in the city of London, the financial centre. First in stockbroking for about 6.5 years, where I was involved with company flotations and mergers and acquisitions and things like that. And then I had a slight change of scene, but stayed in the city, moved across into financial public relations, which is a similar idea in terms of representing your corporate clients to journalists as opposed to investors. So that was about 10 years. And then after a few months off, I made a bit of a change and went into copywriting, albeit I was doing financial writing. So I was writing brochures and websites and things for financial services companies mainly. That's taken me to where I am today. I spent a couple of years employed as a copywriter, and then I went freelance in 2007 and continued that for another 10 years or so. I started off basically full-time employed, then full-time self-employed, and then part-time self-employed, and then kind of ended up where I am today, which is mainly doing non-paid work, voluntary things and the like.
That's really interesting that you say that you sort of joined the city and you kind of went into the financial services sector, because that does seem to be not necessarily a route which everyone who achieves FI takes, but there does seem to be a fairly strong sort of proportion of people who sort of go into the financial sector. But it's quite interesting that you say that you went, from working in the heart of the city to sort of working into PR and then into sort of copywriting and then eventually into sort of working for yourself.
So what happened, I think? I mean, I started my career as, I left university, went into the city. This was back in 1994. And I assumed I was going to have a lifelong career, probably doing financial things in the city. But it sort of dawned on me after time that I didn't really want to do what I was doing forever. And although I had no actual plan to retire early, that wasn't in my head at all. But I had various interests, and I thought that I've enjoyed all my jobs, and I've learned a lot from them, and I've met some great people, and many of those are still friends. But it just became apparent that I didn't want to do what I was doing forever, and therefore I needed to start to think about, well, this could mean there's some uncertainty ahead. How do I prepare for this? So I was basically embarking on an FI path, but I didn't know the term. I mean, it wasn't talked about then. And of course, when I started my career, the internet had hardly taken off, so there wasn't the amount of information around on this sort of thing. I was just doing personal finance stuff that seemed to make sense to me. I'd always been interested in personal finance, even as a teenager. I avidly read the personal finance pages, and I used to chase savings rates between building societies and that sort of thing. And I eventually ended up trading penny shares, which I certainly don't recommend, but it was a way in, and that kind of sparked my interest in wanting to join the city. So although I eventually decided to change jobs, there's always been a theme behind them all, and that's certainly a financial theme that unites them.
That's really interesting that you say, almost even as a from teenage years, that you were interested in investments and sort of finance matters. Was there any particular incident or experience which kind of sparked your interest, or was it just more of a gradual kind of growing interest?
No, I think I was brought up to pay attention to money, to be careful with it. Certainly not get into debt. Debt was something that my family didn't do, and other than mortgages, of course. And that rubbed off on me. And lots of people talk about their money blueprint, and I think there's certainly something to be said for that. And I certainly followed the path that my parents had taken, and which was careful with money. So we didn't have loads and loads of money, but we were comfortable, and we made sure that we spent wisely and made money go as far as possible. And that's how it started, I suppose.
Yeah, I think you definitely make a really good point about the money blueprint, because I think it's only as I've got older that I've realised how much of my own money blueprint and my own sort of attitude towards money and financial matters can sort of be derived from my parents and from sort of childhood years. And I think, I don't know about you, but I think you very much kind of pick and choose. Once you're aware of that, you then, well, I try and do this anyway, kind of think, well, what kind of attitudes are helpful to me, and perhaps what do I perhaps want to not focus on, potentially if your parents had, if your family had quite a negative experience of money. So I think that's definitely a really interesting point. But so I note with interest that you talked about being careful with money, but I understand that you've invested, that your kind of chosen way of investing is sort of via the stock market, which for a lot of people view that as something that's inherently very risky. So I'm kind of interested in sort of how you got into that, but also if you have any tips or advice that you can give to people who are sort of looking to invest in the stock market.
So yes, I mean, there's different ways to define risk, and certainly one of them would be trading penny shares, which is how I started, and I certainly don't recommend it to anyone. But it did, get me into it. And in fact, even when I started stockbroking, I didn't really learn how to invest properly. In fact, I was cold called quite early on by a financial advisor, but it wasn't an IFA as we would recommend today. It was somebody who was tied to an insurance company. So he was basically a salesman pushing products, and I bought a few of them, but it didn't cause too many problems in the long term. I mean, it got me started. It made me comfortable with putting money away, on a regular basis, month by month, paying premiums, and seeing how share prices moved up and down. Now, of course, I was seeing that in my day job, but I wasn't actually doing proper investing as part of that. So it got me started. It wasn't the way I'd recommend today, and we'll come on to what I do recommend. But I certainly didn't have a great investing start, but it's all worked out in the end. And I think as long as you don't mess up too much, then I think you just need to do a few things well, which I believe is something Warren Buffett once said. So it all works out in the end. So, I mean, my investing today, where it is, how I would recommend somebody starts is certainly to keep things simple. The big debate, of course, is whether people invest passively or actively. I'm not dogmatic about it. A lot of people in the FI world, they would say, well, clearly you just buy index funds that track indices, and I would certainly recommend that as a starting point. But I mean, I myself have got some active funds, and of course that's how I started. I mean, this tired financial advisor that cold called me certainly didn't put me into a cheap index tracker, that's for sure. And I've still got some of these things. I'm working through them. Some of them are maturing, and they're still there. But I would suggest that somebody keeps it simple, buys a global tracker, and then there's various flavors of that. I mean, you can get quite involved, whether you're looking at the developed world or emerging equities and large caps and small caps, the size of the companies. That's there's different distinctions there, but in general terms, an index tracker that tracks the stock markets around the world is a great place to start, and maybe the only place to actually be, and maybe you never change that. But I do think it is possible to invest actively and make a success of it. I've been buying a particular fund since 2012, which has performed very well, and I'm very happy with it. And I can't say I've made money out of it because I haven't actually sold it yet, but it's certainly on paper it is well into profit. So I was just looking at my numbers before we spoke, and I think I'm about 50-50 at the moment. So I think I'm 50% passive, 50% active. But certainly some people will say, no, index is the only way to go, passive investing is the only way to go. Others will say, no, you can make active work. I think that the problem with active investing, of course, is that you need to keep a very close eye on what the fund manager is doing. I'm assuming here that you're not picking stocks yourself. I mean, that's active investing as well. And I'm assuming that the beginner certainly hasn't got time or the knowledge to do that. But if you're going to put your faith in an active fund manager, I think there are some that prove themselves, and it is possible to be successful with them. But you need to understand what they're doing. And people will say to me, well, what about Neal Woodford? I think he's in the papers again at the moment. It's been about a year since his income fund was closed and then hit the various problems. And I would say, well, it was pretty clear for some time that he had strayed from what he was meant to be doing, and therefore you as the investor needed to make sure that you were still happy with what he was doing and the new strategy. And I'd suggest that most people would have decided that that was not a safe thing to carry on with. As I say, if you want to reduce the risk entirely of a fund manager messing up for you, then get rid of that risk completely by investing purely on a passive basis.
It's interesting that you mentioned Neal Woodford, because he was a person who cropped up in my mind, actually, because I think I know that all the controversy occurred about a year ago, but I think I read something about him just today, actually, in the Telegraph, about investors potentially getting a very small amount of their money back, potentially, I think, sort of next year. And I know of some people who had invested in his funds, but fortunately they got out when the going was good.
Yes, I mean, in fact, I think I should have checked. I believe I probably did hold his income fund while he was at Invesco Perpetual for some time, but that was a long time ago. That was when I was being persuaded to buy funds purely by on the strength of marketing from various providers, from various platforms. And so I think I did hold the original one when he was with his former employer. But certainly the idea that he was buying more and more illiquid stocks and what they had to do with income, I've no idea. And for me, the telltale sign of something was amiss was when he launched a second income fund, the income focus one, which to me would suggest, what was the first fund doing if that wasn't focused on income? So that would have been a clue, I think, that you needed to pay attention to what was going on.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that obviously you're sort of 50-50 active and passive, because you're right. Very much the sentiment in FI circles is always towards sort of investing in passive funds. But I think you're right to say that really it's about what your interests are. And if you are someone who is, potentially doesn't have that much time in your hands, or it's, not something you're massively interested in, but you want to get a good return for low fees, then, passive investing makes sense. But if you're someone who is prepared to develop a bit more time into sort of looking into active funds and the fees that they charge, and you're someone who has a real genuine interest in it, in different companies and how they're faring, then there's, like you say, that it makes sense for you to kind of to do that.
What I would add is that, I mean, as I say, I'm not picking stocks myself. I'm certainly have no interest, especially now I've got time on my hands. I don't actually want to spend that time poring over company accounts. I'm backing a particular fund manager because I understand what their strategy is. I've known him, it is a him, for a long time. He's been in the city for years, and he articulates a very clear strategy for investing, which I understand. It's very clear that he's going to stick to it, and it will become very obvious very quickly if he doesn't. So he can do the work. He can pore over the company accounts and do the hard work. But if you're going to buy an active fund, then you need to be very clear in your mind what you're doing, what the strategy is, how you can keep an eye on it. People will say that all the active investors together form the market, so that on average they can only do what the market is doing, and because they generally are charging high fees, you're actually going to end up with a lower than market return. But it's quite easy to get rid of the total nonsense and the funds that are just going nowhere. There's a lot of closet trackers out there. And, these are funds that are active funds, but they don't really behave in an active way. They just buy big companies and follow the indices and charge a lot for doing so. It's quite easy to exclude those and then focus on people that are, do seem to be doing well. But as I say, if you're asking me to advise a beginner, I would say go passive. If you've got no idea about the active fund world, then keep it simple. And I mean, you need to invest to do this. You need to invest to build up that nest egg and to protect it against inflation and all that sort of thing. But really, you need to earn as much as you can, save as much as you can. That's the crux. That's the crucial thing to do.
Brings us really nicely onto my next question. So what do you think is important in a sort of achieving FI in terms of mindset and the sort of the values that you have to have?
I think it's about you need to be prepared to be different from other people. Now, if this all comes naturally to you, then you probably know that you are, a bit of a freak. You probably do stand out amongst your friends and your work colleagues, just because you're very sensible with money. You're not going to overpay for things. You may be very frugal, and people will. You probably know that you're a bit different, but if you are new to this, and so far you have had debt, and you do spend money and don't save it, then you've got to realize that things have got to change, and you're going to be different. You're going to be doing different things and not behaving like other people behave. So I guess that would freak some people out. For me, it was just a natural way to look after my money. But it's quite hard to sometimes go against the grain and not do what your peers are doing.
Definitely. I think I've realised increasingly just how conformist I think we all naturally are, because we're herd animals, and going against the grain, and I think particularly going against the consumerist grain, it can be really difficult, and it's amazing how defensive people can react. When you talk about financial independence and the principles behind it, people can sort of react in quite a strange way, and people can be quite dismissive and I think you're right. You do have to be a bit different, but I think you have to be able to stand up and be counted and be okay with being different and taking a slightly different route in life.
Well, it's a very difficult thing to talk about. We Brits don't generally talk about money very much, and so it's quite hard to find other people to bounce these ideas around with. That's why it's great that there are now Facebook groups and other communities where people can talk about this fairly openly and even meet up in real life as we did, Ursula.
Yes.
So it's getting easier to do, but it's hard to talk to friends and family about this sort of stuff, especially as it sounds as though potentially you're going to end up boasting about having a lot of money in inverted commas, because this is let's be honest, this is about building up a nest egg so that you can you don't have to wait for a pension. when we talk about financial independence in this context, we're talking about early financial independence. So we're just, we're getting our financial situation sorted a lot sooner than most people. So it can sometimes sound, and I try and avoid this as much as possible, that that you're maybe boasting about what you've achieved, and it's, of course, people are going to turn around and say, well, get rich and you don't have to work again. Well, that's obvious. But of course, what people don't realise is that maybe they don't need as much as they think. And I think that's a core tenet of early financial independence. You don't need as much as you think you do. You ask the average person what they need to retire, and they will talk about millions and millions. And that's because they have no idea what they spend. They don't realise that maybe they could rein in that spending a bit. They have no idea about investing. They're still just spending what they earn. They succumb to lifestyle inflation, all that sort of stuff. And it's just introducing these new ideas to them, and then maybe they too can do what you're doing.
Yeah, I think you make a really valid point, especially about consumerism and people thinking that they need more than they actually do. Because so obviously we're recording this during the COVID-19 lockdown, which admittedly is currently being eased. But I do wonder if the fact that people have not been able to go out to restaurants and the theatre and do those kind of activities, which, don't get me wrong, we all enjoy, and I am looking forward personally to going out again and having a nice meal at a restaurant.
Me too.
And going to the theatre. But I wonder if it has brought home to some people actually how little you need, because I mean I've certainly found that I've been able to save almost half of my salary, which I would and admittedly I'm not saying that's something that I'd want to do on a full, on a sort of a permanent basis on my current salary, but it goes to show what you really need in comparison to, perhaps just what you think you need or you think that you want.
I completely agree. I mean, this time is a strange time, and I think a lot of people will be thinking about what is important, and even if it's just about the workplace and where they need to work, that sort of thing. I mean, there may well be repercussions. But yeah, I mean, I think people are spending a lot less. I see that a lot of people are opening up investment accounts, apparently. Although I fear maybe that's more to do with trading than investing, but we shall see. So I think it is a time where people are thinking differently, maybe for the first time, and maybe they will come across these FI concepts.
Yeah, and I definitely think the move to remote working, I think that has the potential to be a game changer. Because if you think of the amount of money that people currently spend on commuting, rail fare, tube fare if you're in London, and the added increased cost of being in a big city or even being close to a big city, if you can reduce being in the office from 4 days a week to 1, 2 or 3 days a week, I mean, that can be a huge game changer in terms of saving money on transport, but also saving housing costs as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, a lot of the FI blogs are all about moving to cheaper parts of the world. I mean, it may just be the cheaper part of the country, but yeah, I mean, people will start to think about where they can actually live and still make a living, and that's something that the FI community already knows about. So that's very much something that could increase.
So we've talked a lot about the positives of financial independence, but for many people, FI can seem like quite a tough mountain to climb and very much an exercise in deferring gratification. We've already touched upon the necessity of being different and being okay with being different. Are there any downsides to achieving financial independence, and in particular, the compromises you may have had to make in order to achieve it?
You don't need to make yourself miserable, and if this whole idea means that you are going to deprive yourself and just not enjoy the whole journey, then there's something wrong. I mean, that's just not the way to do it. You're not going to keep it up, are you? I mean, it's unlikely you're going to keep this journey up. So if you are depriving yourself too much, then I don't think that's going to work for you. I mean, as far as I was concerned, I was doing what came naturally, and I didn't think I was depriving myself of anything. I was still going on holiday, still eating out. I mean, when I was working, we were going out with work colleagues all the time. Drinks after work, all that sort of stuff. It's expensive, but I enjoyed it. It's an experience. So there's got to be a balance there that you need to strike. So I would say that the downsides are that you could make yourself miserable, but I think you should just do all you can to avoid that, and maybe think again about what you're trying to do.
I suppose the last thing you want to be is that sort of person who never goes out or never buys a drink for anyone else. I very much agree. I think sometimes people can take it a bit too far and sort of just, there's one thing being frugal, but you don't want to end up just being mean.
Yes, that's right. I mean, I don't have a problem spending money at all. I certainly don't want to overpay for things, and I want to be careful about what I spend that money on. But it's a bit of a cliche saying, prefer experiences over stuff. But I think that's very much it's a truism, and I think I certainly enjoy memories of experiences I've had rather than things. And as I say, I didn't go without. I bought a flat out in East London, but I never traded up. It always makes me smile when people talk about the poverty ladder as though it's something you have to be climbing. Why is it a ladder? Just get a roof over your head, and if your circumstances change, fair enough. But you don't have to do what everyone else does and climb the ladder. I've never owned a car, for example, personally, although my partner has a car, so I won't dwell on that for too long. But I don't think I've gone without, and I've spent money where I need to and I want to. And you talked about deferred gratification, and of course that's the big argument against it. But then the way I see it, getting to FI is about getting your time back. I mean, you might not stop work, but it's certainly being in control of your time, and you can choose to do what you want to do. And surely the ultimate in delayed gratification is actually waiting till your pension age. Waiting until the state decides that you're ready to stop it all, or your company pension scheme or whatever. That's delayed gratification in a way, but while I'm not very happy with it.
No, I agree. I always think it's really bizarre that we sort of wait until the state says, oh, there you go, you can retire now. Because, like you, and I think like a lot of people in the FIRE community, I think freedom is a really important value, and having autonomy and choice over your life. And it's odd to think that the norm is to wait until someone else says, yes, you don't have to work. And I think especially when you think of the millennial generation and the generation that comes after, potentially going to be working until 70 at the youngest, probably. And that seems a hell of a lot of time to sort of defer,
Of course,
having the ability to do what you want.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm Generation X. I'm 47, but of course, when I started work, I assumed the state pension age was 65, but it no longer is. I think it's at least 67 for me now, isn't it? I think it's probably 68 or will be.
Yes.
So the goalposts are moving, as they say. And as I said earlier, we're talking about early financial independence here, because everyone presumably assumes they're going to get to a point where they don't have to earn, albeit they are relying on a state pension, they're relying on their company pension to pay out. But that's where everyone is heading to anyway. So everyone's going towards FI. We're just talking about doing what you can to bring it forward a little bit, and not necessarily to start work, of course.
Yeah, and am I right in thinking that you had a sort of a mini retirement, or you took some time out of work before going back to work and then sort of formally retiring?
Yeah, I call it my first retirement. Yes, that's right. I mean, after I left the city public relations job, this was back in 2004, and I took a few. I chucked the job in. I didn't have a job to go to, and I just wanted to see just take a breather, just assess where I was going, and do a bit of thinking. And it was at that time I was thinking, well, as I said earlier, I enjoyed the jobs, but it dawned on me that I didn't want to carry those particular jobs on forever. And so that was a bit of breathing space. And I was on top of my finances. I knew I could afford to do that. I'd already paid a mortgage off by then as well, so that was fortunate. I had the security of a roof over my head. I certainly didn't have enough to retire full time, or to stop earning, I should say. But yeah, I mean, it was a useful few months off, and indeed I made contacts. And in fact, it was by having a bit of a breathing space that I met someone who then got me into the copywriting business, and the next adventure started. So that was a worthwhile thing to do. But I wouldn't have been able to do it if I was living, paycheck to paycheck, as I say.
That money gave you that freedom to, like you say, take a breather, and then actually, choose to, the opportunity cropped up for you to do something, a bit different, which I'm sure, a lot of people would love to have that opportunity. But like you say, you do have to work hard and save and invest in order to be able to give yourself the gift of time and freedom.
Yeah, and of course, at that point, I'd still never heard of the idea of financial independence, and that there are other people thinking about it. It was just, for me, it was about doing sensible personal finance and increasing my options. And if that meant taking a bit of time out to think about the future, then that's what it was, and it all worked out in the end, of course.
So did you sort of have a sort of a set age or time by which you wanted to be financially independent, or was it more of a, you were just being very sensible and shrewd with your personal finances, and thought that you would therefore be able to retire earlier than everyone else?
Yeah, it's the latter there. I mean, I wasn't, there was, as I say, I started when I started my career. It was with the intention to carry on as most people do. So there was no age, there was no number, none of those FI concepts. It was just about making as much money as I could, and saving as much as I could, and just giving me that financial security, because you just don't know what's around the corner.
So what would you say to someone who was sort of wanting to achieve FI and perhaps living an FI lifestyle in terms of saving and investing shrewdly, but they worried that they wouldn't ever get there? As in, is it worth living an FI lifestyle even if you question whether you'll ever become financially independent?
Yeah, I mean, by FI lifestyle, you mean, earning, saving, and investing, don't you? I mean, you mean avoiding debt, working hard, earning as much as you can, presumably enjoying your job if possible, and not spending it all, actually saving it. And that's the FI lifestyle. And again, as I say, that's sensible personal finance. That's all it is. So I would say, of course, I mean, even if you can't bring that retirement date forward by much, if at all, it's still a sensible thing to do, because presumably you do expect to retire. I mean, I know we're saying that the state pension age may well be a lot higher in the future, but we know it will be. And of course, personal pensions are going to, the age you can take your personal pension is going to move up as well. So, that is moving away from you, but we're still expecting to get there. So the more you can do now to make things a bit more comfortable when you get there is surely no bad thing. And even in the here and now, it's about increasing your financial security. How can that be a bad thing? It's about taking care of yourself, taking care of your dependents if you have any. It's just doing sensible things. So the opposite of not following an FI lifestyle is to do financially reckless things, isn't it? And what's the point of that?
Yes, and I think especially, even just having an emergency fund, I'm always staggered at the, when you hear quite high percentage of people who sort of don't even have like anything more than a grand in savings. Now, obviously, I'm not talking about people who are in poverty or on seriously low incomes, but there are, a lot of people on very high incomes who still just don't have any savings at all. or very little.
The bottom line is that the more you can earn, the easier it's going to be. The quicker you can get to early financial independence. But if it doesn't help, it doesn't matter how much you earn. If 99% of that, 100% of that, even more, is spent, then you're no better off than somebody earning a lot less than you who is doing things differently and is actually tucking some away for the future.
Exactly. So what projects are you currently working on?
So I was checking actually, I did my last paid writing job back in 2017. So I've had 3 years now where I haven't earned anything, and I've been turning my hand to other things. I've taught myself computer programming, which actually I did it as a teenager and really enjoyed it, but then that fell by the wayside. So 3 years ago, I started learning how to build websites and that sort of thing. And it's not a very social thing to do, but it's a great intellectual exercise to do, and it's quite satisfying to build things and solve logical problems and that sort of thing. So that's taking time, but I'm really enjoying that. I've also got involved in community radio, which is fun. I do a bit in front of the microphone, although I haven't done it for a while because of this whole lockdown situation and where I now find myself. So it's a bit harder. But I play my part behind the scenes as well. I've written some computer code for the radio station. I do writing for various things as well. So that's great fun. I'm still hoping to travel. We shall see what happens to that. We do like to travel. I'm keen for that to start up again, but that's a bit of a question mark over that. Yeah, and just general things like reading and cooking and that sort of stuff. Going for walks. I'm not much. My exercise comes from a lot of walking. I'm not one for the gym, which I think is a bit of a shock in the in the financial independence community, as it does seem to involve a lot of exercise.
Yeah, you're right. There does seem to be this sort of almost attitude of healthy body, sort of healthy mind, and emphasis on going to the gym. But obviously at the moment, none of us are going to the gym. So we're all having to rely on home workouts or sort of lots of walking. But you mentioned the community radio. Is that online at all? I'm just wondering if I can include a link to
Yeah,
it.
of course, Marlow FM. That's something I'm very proud to name specifically. So yes, Marlow FM in Buckinghamshire is the station. As I say, it's a community radio station, so it involves us having to fundraise, and it's staffed purely by volunteers. No one gets paid for their time, so it's a worthwhile cause, and it's very popular in the town and the local area that it serves, which is as I say, Marlow in Buckinghamshire.
Oh, brilliant. Okay, well, I'll include a link so listeners can find it for themselves.
Yes, and you can listen online, so I would recommend that.
So, my final question, it's always the same question. Is there anything that surprised you about achieving financial independence?
I mean, there's various ways of tackling this one, I suppose. But bizarrely, what my take on it is that people know what I've done, and I'm surprised that not more people are actually interested in how I did it. And I don't know whether this still comes back to people not wanting to be different, and not wanting to, they think they know what they have to do, and then what's the accepted way of doing things, and there's maybe no other way of doing their life. So I'm very happy to give advice, and I try and play my part in the FI community by sharing whatever advice I can give and guidance. But in outside of the FI community, I'm surprised that more people haven't said, exactly what have you done? Are you working? Are you not working? What's this investing? What do you do? How does the stock market work? All that sort of stuff. I get very little of that. Actually, my sister did come forward and ask me to sort out her pension scheme the other day, so maybe that's a start. But that's a big surprise. I would have thought more people would keen to hear. And as I say, I'm not going to ram this down people's throats. I don't think that's particularly helpful, but I'm keen to share the the knowledge if people want to hear it.
Do you think that an element of that comes down to sort of traditional British reticence to talk about money, and that maybe people feel like it would almost be rude somehow to kind of ask you questions about it? Because, yeah, you're right. It does seem bizarre that you've achieved something which many people sort of only think they can dream of, and yet people seem to be less curious than you would think to find out, well, how did you get there?
Yeah, and I think you're right, Ursula. I mean, and even I don't talk about numbers, which probably isn't helpful. You know, as I would say to people, you probably don't need as much as you think you need, but the obvious question is, well, what is it then? What is that number? What do I need? Now, I'm not going to talk numbers on a podcast, if you will forgive me, but I'm a bit reluctant to talk about that, if only because it might sound as though you're boasting about what you've got, and yes, that sort of British attitude to money is probably playing its part for sure. But one on one, I'd be happy to divulge a bit more, I think, and see where it leads.
Yeah, and I think even with the money part, because I think it's understandable that you don't necessarily want to divulge figures, but there are still principles. So your number would be different to someone else's number anyway, and all people really need to do is have a good idea of what their budget is, and really understand what their monthly and yearly expenditure is.
Yeah, of course, that's absolutely right. I mean, everyone is different. So, talking in absolute terms, absolute figures of money isn't necessarily helpful. But we have our disposal things like the 4% rule, trying to amass 25 times your spending. And, there's a big debate to be had about how reliable that figure is. And, I'm inclined to call it a rule of thumb, as I think most people do these days. But it's still a great way of working out that sort of ballpark number. So if you say to someone, you need to, amass 25 times your yearly spend, and then you can magically claim your FI, that's a good starting point. It's a good rule of thumb. But then, of course, for most people, what, 25 times? They'll probably think you're talking about 25 times less salary. So then you'd have to obviously have that conversation and say, no, I'm talking about how much you actually spend, and in particular, how much you actually need to spend, maybe not what you're spending at the moment. And then maybe it will become a bit more, understandable and realistic for people. So we have that tool available. So yes, we don't have to talk about, absolute sums of money.
Yeah, you're right. And when you think about it, it's a fairly sort of easy to understand sort of formula, like you say, 25 times your annual expenditure, and then the 4% rule based on the Trinity study. Well, hopefully, as a result of this podcast, you may get a few more people taking an interest and demonstrating some curiosity.
Yeah, well, let's hope we all do. I mean, all of us in this community, I think we're all keen to share information. I think sometimes we need to be a bit careful about sharing slightly misleading information. They say a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. And, I do see a lot of people rushing in and spouting things without actually thinking it through, and maybe not always getting it right. But, the enthusiasm's there. And, I mean, we're all happy to share, aren't we, this information. So let's hope people want to hear it.
Yes, definitely. Well, on that positive, enthusiastic note, I want to thank you very much for coming on to my podcast, Luke.
My pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this interview, then please do subscribe to my channel.